What's the most absurd conspiracy theory you've ever heard? Story 1. Someone brought up Paul McCartney, although it was just briefly. The Paul is dead conspiracy says that Paul died in 1966 and was replaced by someone who looked, sounded, or wrote like him. The Beatles were too famous to stop making music, so they left clues in future songs to let real fans know that something wasn't right. It's silly on its face, but I'll point out that Paul McCartney has done a lot since 1966. If he were replaced by a doppelganger, that doppelganger would be much more accomplished than Paul ever was. Maybe it's a good thing he was waiting in the wings to replace one half of the Lennon-McCartney songwriting duo without a hitch or a word of protest from the other Beatles. Two of them would have been happy to get more solo songwriting credit if Paul was no longer able to contribute instead of being the workaholic of the group. Story 2. The Chinese army, which is made up entirely of women and has never been hurt by blue light, is hiding out in underground bunkers in the mountains of China. My neighbor says that the one-child policy was put in place so that China could surreptitiously train an army of special troops. There was never a lot of infant girls that died. They were all sent to secret places where they would spend their whole lives learning how to fight and spy. They will only show themselves when China decides to attack the US. Also, China sends electronics all around the world with harmful blue light in them to mess up other countries' sleep patterns and weaken their military power. A lot of people not getting enough sleep for a long time can lead to widespread mental illness and behavioral disorders that will stay with any service member throughout their military career. China doesn't provide their female soldiers any equipment that emit blue light, so they stay in perfect sync with their circadian rhythm and don't get the mental disorders and behavioral problems that a lot of young people nowadays have. When I questioned him why China only wanted women super soldiers, he responded that the last step in their plan for global domination was to force repopulation with Chinese genes, because the war would certainly kill off a lot of Americans. If each female soldier got pregnant with a kid from a surviving US man, those children would have dual citizenship. If enough US citizens obtained Chinese citizenship, they would govern the US no matter what happened in the war. Story 3. Al Smith ran for president in the 1920s. It was important since he was the first Catholic to seek for office. At that time, newspapers all over the country published a picture of him at the opening of the Holland Tunnel in New York. So what did crazy people who hated Catholics think? They thought he would dig a tunnel from New York to the Vatican so he could get direct orders from the Pope. Not a figurative tunnel where the Pope could hear you, but a real tunnel that you could walk through or take a train or anything to get to the Pope. There is a real tunnel that goes from New York, under the Atlantic, to mainland Europe, and then to Rome. You idiot, crazy conspiracy theories aren't new. Story 4. I learned in college that Marlowe wrote all of Shakespeare's plays from my main Renaissance literature professor. One key thing that makes this theory seem silly is that Marlowe died about midway through Shakespeare's career. The hypothesis says that Marlowe gave most of his works to Shakespeare, but it doesn't say why he saved a few for himself. Marlowe chose to fake his death, traveled to Spain under a new name, and kept sending plays to Shakespeare. It had been kept a secret for hundreds of years. My professor said that it was crazy for Marlowe to move to Spain, where the Spanish Inquisition was, after being found guilty of being an atheist. Okay, that's amazing. Not in the wow, that's convincing way, but more like, how many mental gymnastics can one conspiracy theory do before it falls apart? First of all, the timeline is a muddle. Marlowe dies in 1593, under questionable circumstances, of course, but Shakespeare's career doesn't really take off until years later. Either Marlowe authored more than 30 plays from the tomb, or he staged the most pointless move in literary history. Spain? After being called an atheist? During the Spanish Inquisition? That's like running away from a forest fire by jumping into a volcano. Story 5. There is a secret submarine testing site at Walker Lake in Nevada. In 2015, a series of earthquakes shook a nearby mountain range. Some crazy people said it was because the military was blasting a tunnel from Monterey, California to the lake so submarines could be moved from the Pacific Ocean to the lake. The lake is 226 miles from Monterey and almost 4,000 feet higher, so that would require a huge tunnel. It would also be impossible to hide the submarines because the lake is only 65 feet deep, and there is a major highway running along the whole length of it. Story 6. I have a family member who believes in conspiracy theories. I was a poll manager in my country's elections a few years ago. I spent hours and hours learning how to run a polling place correctly. A lot of that training was about how to follow the many, very strict steps to keep votes secret and safe, and how to count them in front of anyone who wants to when the polls close. I also have a lot of manuals that show me how to do these things, and I follow them exactly. I know it's not an unusual conspiracy theory, and it doesn't seem that crazy when you look at the big picture, but I can say with 100% certainty that voting is not rigged in my nation. This is how every poll works, and the public can see everything. There is no way to hide any kind of vote count trickery. Even though I have paperwork and proof that voting isn't rigged, my family member still says it is and that I'm lying. It makes me insane. Story 7. Theory of the Sun Simulator. Scientists covertly sent a gigantic satellite dish with big lights or lenses into space to simulate the sun because it looks like our sun has already burned out or is starting to burn out. They did this so that people wouldn't notice that there was less sunshine. I found a lady's YouTube channel by chance. She had a lot of videos that said Alaska's Weather Service webcams showed footage of the sun simulator, with the real sun visible in some still frames, like the second sun on Tatooine. When there was a anomaly in the footage, it looked to me like lens flare, birds or bugs flying in front of the camera could explain what I saw. Story 8. Oh, I've been hunting for the appropriate spot for this. You know about the lizard people, right? Well, listen to this. Eve was not Adam's first wife. Lilith was his first wife. You can look her up. God made Lilith the same way he made Adam, but she was too wild, so he kicked her out of Eden and fashioned Eve from Adam's rib so she would be easier to manage. It didn't work out so well because of the apple incident, but I digress. After Lilith was kicked out of Eden, she had kids with the snake, and then there were lizard people. You could imagine aliens, but no. The kids of Lilith and the snake, often known as the devil, are all mixed up with the kids of Adam and Eve. They have demon blood and don't even know it. Children of the devil. Boom, drop the mic. Story 9, I got one, but it'll probably be buried. A person I met told me for sure that Elon Musk's satellite internet network, Skylink, Skynet, or whatever, was going to crash all the banks in the world and destroy everyone's financial records. After then, governments from all around the world would work together to set up a government-controlled banking system using the financial information they obtained before crashing the private banks. I don't think I could disguise the "you crazy weirdo" on my face because he stopped talking to me after that. Wow, that's not just a conspiracy theory, it's like a plot line for a Black Mirror episode that never got made. Let's take a second to think about this. First, Elon Musk's Starlink, bless him, he tried, is a company that provides internet using satellites. It's not a cyber death ray that can blow up banking systems from orbit. Second, the thought that it would cause all banks to fail at once? What? By sending bad feelings to their servers? Banks are everywhere, have backups, are very safe, and are regulated like Fort Knox 3 times over? Story 10. JFK didn't die at Dealey Plaza. Instead, he was spared by an experimental surgery. However, the damage to his brain was so bad that he couldn't walk or talk well. He was not fit to stay in office, so he was secretly taken to Scorpios Island, which at the time belonged to Greek tycoon Aristotle Onassis. This was a way for the magnate to repay personal favors to the Kennedy family, mostly favors owed to JFK's father, and because he had been friends with Miss Jackie Kennedy for a long time. So Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy's marriage to Mr. Onassis was a cover-up for how long she and her kids stayed at Scorpios. This crazy plan will be so funny that it will be funny, if it weren't for the fact that it was printed in a few respectable and well-respected international journals in the early 1970s. Story 11. A lot of people are saying that oil is like Earth's blood, and that it will never run out. They made up the word fossil fuel to fool us, which is part of the proof. Fossil comes from Latin and meaning dug out of the earth. The term fossil fuel came about before we even knew what animal fossils were. Based on the latter part, I've heard that Henry Ford made up dinosaurs to fool us all. In real life, people found dinosaur fossils before Ford was even born. Story 12. The Chernobyl disaster was an attack on the USSR's Pripyat, a nuclear community that was functional, successful, productive, and profitable, despite the Cold War embargo. This showed that a true social commune could thrive when its people believed in the cause. Hippies were constantly loathed by the authorities in the late 1960s for being daydreamers. But what's wrong with trying to follow a dream? It made the US government look weak, which was just not okay. So they were making up stories to make them look like drugged up cult members. They even killed them and said it was because they were spies and communists and things like that. It basically worked to end the dreams. Seeing Russian hippies accomplish good for the USSR and all of her countries and people, and being viewed as a value, and their workaround of Cold War particular restrictions, this made the US Goviti officials feel threatened, scared the hippie movement would spike again. So, Chernobyl, part of Putin's personal goal to not only bring the countries back together, but also to prove this side of the narrative meant he required access to the plant to get that proof. After they invaded and took Pripyat, there were satellite photos that showed a lot of trench digging around the plant. After that, there was no more tale, and they departed Chernobyl not long after. What did they discover there? Story 13. A coworker told me that he thinks all sightings of aliens are legitimate, but none of them are aliens. Area 51 was built to work on holographic technology that came from the alien ship that crashed in Roswell. So, the government makes all of the alien encounters as holograms to test the technology and prove that aliens exist. The government will then utilize the holograms to mimic an extraterrestrial invasion so they can put martial law in place once the technology is flawless. Story 14. A group of crazy people is running against the 15-minute city idea for city planning because they think it is a form of state imprisonment. They think that instead of living in a nice area where it is easier to walk or bike to run errands than use their big pickup truck, they will have to live in a gated neighborhood prison with barbed wire checkpoints. They put up stickers and graffiti on all the safe streets and traffic calming in my city. I bet it's only one or two people, as it's mostly in certain neighborhoods and not everywhere, but they are highly dedicated to reading anything that makes motorists slow down for a second. People who believe in conspiracy theories should live in a rural area instead of a metropolis with a lot of traffic and not enough safe places for people to walk. I believe they feel oppressed since they don't have enough money to reside in a nice complex. Only really rich people would live in guarded compounds. Story 15. The philosophy behind the Rubik's Cube. I think it goes like this. Every year since the Rubik's Cube was out, someone has set a new record for beating it. So, if that's true, there will come a time when someone fixes the space-time continuum and gets rid of a negative amount of time. So this will really let individuals travel through time. So, instead of saying it's a toy, Rubik's Cube marketing will say, travel through time with our Rubik's Cube, which will make their earnings and output soar because they create these goods in large quantities. If they make something that would change the weight of all the Rubik's Cubes, that would be another difficulty. Now, this is a disaster that needs to be avoided. Therefore, Rubik's would develop a lightweight cube to fix the problem, but that causes another dilemma. People can time travel even more because the lighter Rubik's Cube can be solved faster than the conventional ones. They can travel to a time before anything existed or will exist, which makes humans disappear from time until the Rubik's Cube is banned. Story 16. The theory of the mud flood. My ex-wife went mad and lost her mind, so I'll do my best to explain it. In the 1800s, muck covered the whole world. So the authorities took all the kids away from their parents and killed them, so they could say whatever they pleased. In fact, all the buildings in the world are far taller than they look. Most are many feet below the surface, and there are giants. That's why the ceilings and doorways in ancient buildings were higher. I've never smiled and nodded so much in my life. I wouldn't have stayed as long as I did if she weren't so hot. Story 17. That the moon has a hidden base that collects our souls when we die and returns them back to Earth in an endless loop. That aliens are in charge of the Earth and feed off of our negative emotions like fear, despair, and anger. It looks like they have raised their energy needs, which is why each year seems to be worse than the last, making our misery worse through wars, economic crises, and pandemics. It seems that the only way to break this never-ending cycle is to follow the teachings of religions and live a clean life and love, despite all the problems. This will starve these energy vampires, who will then let your soul free. That earthquakes are produced by people and planned explosives in bunkers below ground, and they draw lotteries to decide which country would be next to suffer. Story 18. The theory of the Titanic changeover. What people come up with to prove the theory is hard to believe. There is a lot of proof that they didn't exchange it with another ship and couldn't have even if they wanted to. And there is no sense there because they say they switched it with the Olympic sister ship. The difficulty is that the Olympic was also a spanking new ship that cost the same amount to build. They lost money when the Titanic sank since they didn't get any money from the insurance claim. Because of that, they were $3 million in the hole. Still, folks keep saying they were trying to commit fraud on their insurance. When someone attempts to say it's true when the fact shows it's not, it really makes me mad. The Titanic switch idea is a great example of a conspiracy theory. Someone saw two ships that looked a little bit alike and said, "Yeah, that's enough for me to change history, so it." Let's take it apart. First of all, as you indicated, both the Olympic and the Titanic were new ships and cost about the same. It doesn't make any sense to trade them for an insurance scam. They weren't hiding a broken-down fishing boat under the name Titanic. The logic is quite much, what if I wreck my brand new car to get insurance and lose more money than I get back? Smart. Story 19. That it wasn't the Titanic that sank, it was the Olympic, her sister ship. And they did it on purpose. There are two hypotheses about why this is happening, which is far worse. To get rid of some of his competitors, JP Morgan sank the Titanic. White Star changed the ship since Olympic was damaged in a slight crash, and it would have cost too much to fix it. So they switched the ships, destroyed the damaged one, and got the insurance money. It would have been almost impossible to switch the two ships. These boats are not little. Someone would have noticed that one or both of them were suddenly not in their slip where they were meant to be. And they had very well-known mistakes. So if you switch the Olympics with Titanic, someone would have noticed. They were able to move two huge loud ships without anybody knowing. They paid a lot of workers to quickly shift things from one ship to the other to make them look like the other ship. And no one said anything? Did no one say anything to anyone about how they helped switch the ships? And how do you know for sure that the ship will sink? You should pray that the ship finds something that could really sink it. You would have to pay off everyone who would be in charge of the ship at any given time to make sure it hit something big enough to sink it. It would have been very hard to get every crew member to even try, since most people thought the ship couldn't sink and only a few individuals knew what kind of damage it would take to truly sink it. How much money would they have had to give everyone to get them to agree to wreck the ship they are on in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? Story 20 steel hulls can't be cut by water. The concept is that if you tried to pick up water and use it as a knife, it would be really bad. Also, boats are intended to keep water out. How did ice, which is a kind of water, cut through the Titanic's hull? It looks like this one might be true because some of the richest families in the world received their money from the Titanic insurance settlement. Those were also the people who could sell the yacht as unsinkable to an outrageous degree. They had a plan, a reason, and the tools to achieve it. It might have been sealed if the bulkheads went up a floor. The waterline would have been higher if there had been less cargo. It wouldn't have been as horrible if the boats hadn't been mostly empty. They could have had time to build more boats if they had left earlier and not stayed silent. Method? Reason? How? They made a lot of money. Story 21. Graham Hancock's main idea behind all of his ancient apocalypse nonsense is that there was a highly developed culture on Earth, the Atlanteans, whose main technology was telepathy or telekinesis. They built all the complicated megaliths around the planet, but they left no other technological or genetic proof behind. The part that really gets to me is that it's just a twist on a German ethnocentric thesis. It's crazy how many people online are talking about it who don't know anything about nature or archaeology and don't seem to realize it's German propaganda. A lot of people who rush in to defend Hancock don't even know that he completely accepts and embraces the idea that magic and telepathy were a big part of how this culture lived and left no tools behind. Story 22, The One with the Illuminati. I just heard about it as a joke online once in a while, but then I ran across an old friend who believes in it. I think it's really interesting, so we spoke about it more, and he said, word for word, there are people behind the scenes who are trying to corrupt our minds. I didn't even think about it when I said, yeah, corporations and social media, they have just changed the landscape of our civilization. Yada yada. He went on to say that their only purpose is to corrupt people's hearts and souls. I don't like this conspiracy because it's extremely childish, like something you'd see in a kid's movie about not being bad. Not a conspiracy theory, but a different friend of mine said out loud, they need to figure out a way to take all the energy of the stars in the sky and put it into the moon to make it our new sun. He didn't sound like he was joking, so I don't know if he was playing me or not. If he was, he did a great job. He also thinks that urine therapy works and that the sun is not bigger than the moon. Story 23. Yes, most serious scholars on the subject think that the story of Jimmy Carter crying after hearing about classified information about UFOs is real. The following material is quite disturbing and will explain why Carter never kept his promise to tell the public about secret UFO information. More than one witness confirmed the story that U.S. presidents are simply given a brief overview of the subject. The CIA oversees the program and only gives the president information when he or she needs to know it. They don't think that the president's curiosity is enough of a reason to know. After Kennedy, this was put into place, and all presidents since then have only been given short briefings. Some presidents, for unclear reasons, got more than others. Okay, let's get to your question. President Carter is a very devout person who has seen a UFO with 6 other people. People assumed he would be the one to eventually tell the public about UFOs, but the tale goes that he was continually blocked. The CIA eventually had the talk with him. After that, he put his head in his hands and started to cry heavily. He was clearly upset for weeks after that. Story 24. A friend of mine is sure that the moon is an artificial spaceship. He thinks that every scientist on Earth agreed to cover it up by getting rid of all evidence of it from books and the internet, and coming up with the current impact hypothesis as the moon's origin. Basically, young Earth got hit by another planet, and the debris that didn't come back together formed Luna in its orbit. He still believes this, even though the main evidence for his claim is complete nonsense. He says that the moon is within Earth's Roche limit, which is the point where Earth's gravity will overpower a moon-sized object's own gravity and cause it to break apart. In reality, Earth's Roche limit is 9,500 kilometers above the surface, while Luna orbits about 385,000 kilometers from the planet.